Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Louise Derrickson, and I currently act as the chair of the Ethical Metalsmiths Education Committee. I will be introducing our guest lecturer in just a moment, but before I do, I wanted to take a second and tell you about the current call for entry, So Fresh, So Clean 2023, and maybe some details that will help you with your submissions. I am proud to say that I helped to start So Fresh, So Clean in 2014 when I attended Virginia Commonwealth University. And I can't believe that we're starting our 9th installment of the show. But each year, the exhibition is organized by the EM Students chapter at VCU. This year's exhibition will be led by Chelsea, Yifi, and Shannon, with our distinguished guest jurors, Gina Sao and Dr. Emily Stoerher. Since the first show, we've included 3 generous awards, including the title of Ethical Metalsmiths Emerging Artist, which comes with a $1,000 cash prize. There have been some changes to our website since our last exhibition in 2021, and I want to take a second and show you how you can apply this year. The first thing you'll need to do is to sign up as a member or renew a membership on the website. So you're going to select that Join Us button in the top right. You will want to select the student member option, $35 annually. Just follow that sign up button. First, you're going to be prompted to create an account and then complete your membership registration. So start with this information, and then it'll bring you to the second page here. Complete the registration information by selecting those 3 boxes, yes, yes, and yes. And then I want you to notice the message for students and educators. Once you have checked out, there is a form that you need to complete so that we can verify your student status. You do not need to add anything into this field here. I just put a dash in there to show you which one I'm talking about. So you don't need to add anything there. That's a step. That's just a step to remind you of something to do in a moment. You can also add your Instagram account handle there if you'd like. And then, of course, don't forget, if you did get a discount code from your instructor or anyone else, make sure that you add that in. Now you can log into your account. So you'll see the login word here, or if you've already logged in, it'll say account in that area. When you're signed in, you'll find a selection of options. So you'll just log in and it brings you right to this menu on the right-hand side here for student membership. You'll see that the top form is titled Student Membership Form. This is the one that you want to complete right away once you've finished your membership sign up. And then notice the button below, So Fresh, So Clean, call for entry, right? You're just going to follow that button and complete the application form as directed on the form. So that's where you'll locate that application form once you've logged in to your account on the website. I also want to bring your attention to the student profile form, where here it says create your student profile. One of your member benefits, regardless of being accepted into the So Fresh, So Clean or winning any of those awards, all of our student members are showcased on our website in the members area. It's listed under this jewelry section, and you can also find it on the EM Students homepage. So both of these menus include it, the education menu and the jewelry menu, is where you'll see student members featured. And you can also click on these images and it'll bring up details about the image and the artist. So I just wanted to show that off as one of your member benefits. That's, the stuff that your $35 goes to. And then the other really important member benefit that you'll see featured here is the Student Community Circle login. So if you clicked through onto that link, this is a little pop-up of what the Circle community kind of looks like. This is one of your most useful benefits to being a member. You're going to log in and learn about what is happening, in the responsible jewelry movement. You can post questions, anything you have about your practice that you want to maybe discuss with someone else in the field who might know more. That's your place to do it. There's lots of articles that are posted there, just things that you want to have your attention brought to. There's also a marketplace and a place for sales leads to be posted that maybe you can grab. But it's a really amazing resource, and it is only for members. So that's one of your really great member benefits, in addition to being able to apply to So Fresh, So Clean. So don't miss out on that. And then finally, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for So Fresh, So Clean 2023, Emily Stoerher. As the Rita J. Kaplan and Susie B. Kaplan Curator of Jewelry at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, Emily is an international presence in the jewelry field. At the MFA, she oversees a collection that spans 6,000 years and includes more than 22,000 objects. It highlights ancient jewelry, a growing collection of 19th and 20th century high-style jewelry, and the Daphne Farrago collection of contemporary jewelry. At the MFA, Emily curated Past is Present revival jewelry, co-curated Boston-made arts and craft jewelry and metalwork, and Hollywood Glamour, fashion and jewelry from the silver screen. Emily is a frequent lecturer and has been invited to present at museums and conferences and organizations around the globe. The diversity of Emily's interests in the field are evidenced in her publications and lecture topics, which range from 19th century jewelry to works by contemporary makers and designers. In addition to her work as curator, Emily has spent more than a decade as an adjunct professor at Boston area colleges, and for 4 years managed 3 robust undergraduate programs in fashion, design, and merchandising. Most recently, Emily developed a history of jewelry course for the art history department at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. A leader in the field, Emily served as a member of the board of directors for the Society of North American Goldsmiths from 2017 until 2020, and is currently the spokesperson of the Jewelry Vetting Committee of all 3 of the European Fine Arts Fairs. Emily's academic work has focused on the history of material culture and the philosophy of identity. She is particularly interested in the evolution of taste, and her dissertation focused on the influence of the Hollywood red carpet. Emily holds a PhD in humanities from the Salve Regina University, Master of Arts in Fashion and Textile Studies from the Fashion Institute of Technology, and Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. I want to extend an enormous thank you to Emily for allowing us to include this lecture in our So Fresh, So Clean curriculum tools. And with that, I will let Emily take it from here.
Hi, I'm Emily Stoerher, and it's my privilege to be part of So Fresh, So Clean's Design Challenge jury and to share with you a bit of background on the call for entries. This project challenges you to investigate your studio, processes, methods, and personal goals. Tell us about it, ask questions, and then show us the work that you're making. As you consider the 3 questions in the design challenge, what do you hope will be the life cycle of your work? How does that impact the materials you choose? And in what ways do your studio habits support your need for sustainability? I'd like to share some of the many ways artists have approached their work over hundreds, and in some cases, thousands of years. We can't always know the artist's intent, and there are many ways to approach the examination of an object that might help as you consider the life cycle of your own work. This lecture is divided into 5 parts. Starting with Jewelry 101, I'll offer a bit of context and perspective on my way of thinking, followed by Material Culture, which we'll talk about and address how these objects exist in the world. Identity explores jewelry's close connection to the body and the ways that influence and inform the way it is understood. In Ways of Looking, I offer a framework for approaching jewelry and give examples how the narratives and stories surrounding specific pieces come to be, keeping in mind that these stories evolve over time and that objects can tell multiple stories simultaneously. Finally, I'll end by talking about provenance and the importance of making a mark. Let's get started. Jewelry is small, intimate, precious. It's a conveyor of wealth, but also a communication device. Jewelry plays a role in self-presentation, yet its small size and luxury status means that it's often overlooked. Jewelry has a very long history, dating back thousands of years. Jewelry can be considered as decoration or adornment, but sometimes it can be the key to unlocking a key detail about a person. As we begin to think about what we can learn about jewelry from looking at art, let's take a look at an example. A few years ago, I was invited to Harvard University Art Museums to take a closer look at this painting. The painting was acquired by Harvard in 2017, and curators were interested to learn more about who this young woman was. The painter is an important one. Julian Hudson was an antebellum painter with a studio in the French Quarter in New Orleans. He's among the earliest American painters of African descent. Hudson's untimely death at the age of 33 meant that very few paintings were left behind. This portrait was made in 1840, shortly after Hudson's second trip to Paris. The sitter is unknown, but is thought to be a free woman of color from New Orleans. It's unknown who owned the painting before it somehow arrived in Kansas City, Missouri in the 1920s. The curators at Harvard wondered if we could learn anything about the woman by looking at her jewelry. I was intrigued. Who is this? Does the jewelry communicate something about who she is? She's wearing a fashionable white dress with black lace gloves and a matching shawl. The covered up nature of the dress likely means it's a late morning or an afternoon dress. The neckline and the transparency of the sleeves reveal some skin, and garments tended to be more revealing as the day progressed. In February of 1840, Queen Victoria wed Prince Albert wearing a white dress. Before this, white was not yet the preferred color for weddings. Women tended to wear their best dress, which might not be white. So the white color doesn't necessarily immediately tell me that this is a wedding portrait. Now, let's zoom in and look more closely to see the jewelry that she's wearing. The first thing I noticed was this necklace because I was unsure of what it was. It's a fine gold chain with a pendant featuring a diving bird with outstretched wings. The wings are attached to the necklace with these chain elements. Her earrings feature a rosette, a stylized flower with the circular center and then circles all around. You can see the motif replicated in the pattern of her dress and on the border of her shawl. I looked and then I went back to my office and I did some research. The pendant represents the spirit esprit. This is a religious symbol shown as a bird, often a dove, diving down from heaven, and it's worn as a symbol of faith. You find similar styles being worn by French Catholics in France, as well as Quebec and presumably in New Orleans. It's usually a pendant hung on a ribbon. This delicate and refined all gold version is unique and could have been made by someone locally in New Orleans. The wearing of this necklace means that this woman was comfortable being a Catholic during a moment when Catholics were not particularly welcome. Perhaps things were different in New Orleans, but elsewhere in the country, Catholics were the subject of widespread discrimination. And it would have been unusual to flaunt your Catholic faith in such a highly visible manner. She's putting herself out there being painted in a necklace like this. The earrings are either diamond, glass, or topaz, and likely date to the Georgian period or before, making them slightly earlier than the painting, which was created in 1840. They're likely paste. This is the name for early costume jewelry. That's just my gut, given that she's wearing daytime clothes. If they're diamond, they indicate that she was a married woman and a well-to-do lady. Her clothing seems to also reflect that, but it would be unusual to wear diamonds before the evening. Diamond rosettes were popular in the first decade of the 19th century. The central round stone, surrounded by others of equal or slightly larger size, can be seen in earrings, rings, and necklaces from this period. When you find them today, they're sometimes taken from elements of a broken or discarded jewel, like the link of a necklace. Stylistically, there's a disconnect between the earrings and the necklace. Perhaps the necklace is hers and the earrings are not. The rosette earrings are about glamour and high style, but the necklace is religious. The earrings and the necklace are at odds. It's a mismatch. It's possible that Hudson took creative license with the earrings. They match so many other elements of the ensemble, the lace, the flowers on her dress. But the necklace is most telling. It's not uncommon for Catholic Creole women to wear a necklace like this. At a time when much of the country witnessed anti-Catholic, anti-Irish sentiment, New Orleans, with its strong ties to both French and Spanish cultures, had a different religious history, one that was more welcoming of Catholics. Because of the necklace, we can confidently say that she was a young Catholic woman, dressed at the height of fashion. Hopefully, this woman's mysterious identity will reveal itself in time, but the jewelry leaves behind details about who she was and what was important to her. As a jewelry curator, I love these types of mysteries. Much of my work is focused on bringing jewelry stories to life in the museum galleries. One jewel has many stories to tell, and I have to make choices how to present the work, creating the context and narrative that will surround them. In many cases, the histories of an object are continually revealing themselves. I'm always learning new things about the objects in the collection. I oversee a collection that spans more than 22,000 objects. The works of art that make up this group span 6,000 years and come from cultures around the globe. They cover many genres of the jewelry world, from ancient materials excavated from Egypt and the Sudan to fine jewelry in platinum and diamond, and from costume jewelry made from plastics and glass to contemporary jewelry by artists in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Without trying to put these works of art in any particular category, I think of them all as jewelry. Each connects to the other in some way, and their many stories are intertwined. The Dutch collector Majan Unger's doctoral dissertation was published in English a few years ago. Jewelry in Context is a small but substantial book, and if you have not read it, I strongly encourage adding it to your library. She defines jewelry as an object that is worn on the human body, as decorative and symbolic additions to an outward appearance. There are many varying definitions of what jewelry is, but this one resonates strongly with the work that I do. My thinking about jewelry is deeply connected to the body, and you'll hear more about that shortly. Often contemporary jewelry is considered separately from jewelry made of precious metals or fashion, thought of as craft or decorative arts, but it's an art form that's inextricably linked to clothing, the body, and by extension to identity. Let's unpack this idea a bit, but first, let's think about a material culture. Material culture is the study of objects and their social history, the way they're used, how they are worn or appreciated in the world, how they move around, how they're monetized, and how they connect to the culture that they come from. Jewelry has a social life after it leaves the studio. I want you to understand that your work is deeply connected to history. Take, for example, the 17th century purchase of Manhattan Island for trade beads. There's a lot to unpack thinking about this exchange, but in this context, I share this example simply to think about the value that jewelry and raw materials has held across place and time. Beads function as money. Here are some examples of wampum shell from the Museum of the American Indian. Like gold, these were transformed into wearable jewelry, traded and held close as portable wealth, not unlike the way diamonds move around the world today. In many ways, jewelry history is in its infancy, and there are many histories to learn and many directions to take this research. Until very recently, jewelry was only owned by the richest and most powerful people. Much of what survives has storied provenances and important former owners. This brooch was owned by Marjorie Merriweather Post and made around 1929. Post was an American heiress. Her wealth came from the General Foods Company, and she had a home outside Washington, which is today a museum called Hillwood, and she had a residence in Palm Beach. You might have heard of Mar-a-Lago. This extraordinary brooch features a 60-carat emerald in its center. While it may have been put into the piece of jewelry in the 1920s, the emerald dates to the 17th century. It was likely mined in Colombia before being sent to Europe, probably via Spain or Portugal, before landing in India. In India, it was carved shortly after it was excavated. The carnation blossom dates to about that time. The reverse of the stone features an iris that was likely carved in the 19th century. Whatever it was set in during that time, perhaps a Maharaja's turban ornament, was sold and broken apart in the early 20th century when it was purchased from Marcus and Company and fabricated into a brooch by the New York firm Oscar Heyman and Company. It was a favorite jewel of Mrs. Post, and she wore it in this painting and other photographs throughout her lifetime. I use this brooch as an example of the many ways you can think about jewelry and the many directions from which you can approach a subject like this: gemstones, materials, cultural history, social history, personal history of the provenance and the clients, technical innovation, makers, designers, fabricators, art history, design history, or just history. Every object I will show you here has multiple histories. As it is connectedness to the body, jewelry is often discussed as the domain of women. But if we consider the field cross-culturally and historically, it's often men who wore these dazzling jewels. Keep in mind that this subject requires multidisciplinary thought, and think of what your jewelry communicates today and what you hope it will convey in the future. Here's just some of the way jewelry is installed in museums. I'm excited to see that more and more installations are thinking about the body and the role that it plays in how we present jewelry in the museum context. How do we study jewelry history? Usually, historically, this has been done by looking at inventories, by looking at portraits, studying museum collections, royal collections, and beginning in the 20th century, photographs. The history of jewelry is a history of style, art, and design movements. We learn a great deal by looking at jewelry this way and thinking about the connection of the body. Jewelry communicates on so many levels. It says something about the artist, but also about the consumer and how the desire to see themselves, and in turn, how they see themselves and how they're viewed by others. Here again, I return to an idea articulated by Unger. By wearing jewelry, people can radiate sexual availability, exercise power, be accepted by their own kind, or on the contrary, be expelled or even condemned for manifesting undesirable symbolism or sympathies. Engagement rings and wedding rings are perhaps the best example here. Without saying a word, the wearing of a ring identifies someone as available or unavailable and communicates one's status in the world. Here is a Renaissance example. In the 20th century, the association between diamonds and sexual availability was commoditized by De Beers. Controlling much of the world's diamonds, they had an interest in selling the gemstone. And in 1947, they produced the "A Diamond is Forever" slogan. You're seeing some of those early advertising campaign images here. The advertising campaign was later celebrated as the best of the 20th century. And the firm, J. Walter Thompson, leaned on Hollywood to help shift American thinking about the gemstone from something exclusive and only available to the elite to something that everyone might know and everyone should desire. The 1953 film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes starred Marilyn Monroe singing the song "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend," connecting status, wealth, power, and shifting ideas about the gemstone, despite the fact that most of the film's jewelry was costume jewelry made of non-precious materials. I offer this example to help you consider the various ways we can think about jewelry and the multiple perspectives we can and should consider. Think about your own perspective as the artist and what you want your work to communicate, but recognize that you can't control the narrative once it moves out into the world. Consider what it might mean to the owner and how it might be passed from hand to hand during its lifetime. How those who come into contact with the jewelry might think about it, and how it connects to other work created in the 21st century, as well as the designs of the past and the future. Context is everything, and meaning shifts over time. Before I move on, I just want to point out this slide and think about these ways of thinking, because this really informs the way that I approach jewelry and the way that I think about jewelry and identity intersecting. There's the artist's perspective, but there's also the perspective of the wearer, which is usually the owner, as well as the watcher, the person who's coming into contact with this and seeing it on the body and what they come to think about it and think about the owner because of the piece of jewelry, and then how it relates to the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. Think about these things as you approach your work. When this bicycle brooch was created, it made a statement about feminism and about female freedom. As the bike allowed women to move around in the world with a newfound independence. I could go on and on about this, but I'll save it for another time. I use it here as an example to say that today this might look like a novelty jewel, something we might not give a second glance to. But at the time that it was originally designed and worn, this was a very powerful symbol that would have sent a statement as somebody wore it and as people saw it being worn. Jewelry always communicates, but the wearer's intention is sometimes essential to giving a design meaning. For example, Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State during the Clinton administration, was known for wearing brooches that aided in her diplomatic intentions. Her mood, her feelings, her hopes, they all could be read across the table by looking at her jewelry. At first, this went unnoticed, but eventually people caught on. In 2009, Read My Pins in the associated book, Broaching It Diplomatically, shared the stories of her career and her pin choices. Similarly, the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just the second woman on the Supreme Court, was described as a trailblazing feminist. She wore necklaces that she called collars to signal her gender and the historic position she held. The Black judge's robe has a slight V at the center collar, and it's designed that way to show a man's necktie and shirt. In 2009, Ginsburg told the Washington Post that, quote, she thought it would be appropriate if we included as part of our robe something typical of a woman, end quote. And that's when she began to wear this collar or necklace. More recently, Amanda Gorman wore a caged bird ring as she read her poetry at the 2020 presidential inauguration. A gift from Oprah Winfrey, it was a nod to Maya Angelou's poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. But as you may have heard, it also connects to the long history of jewelry's functioning as a communication device, relating to the caged bird and the bird of freedom brooches made by Cartier when Paris was under Nazi occupation during World War II. The artist Joyce J. Scott, whose large beaded collars unabashedly take on issues of gender, race, and sexuality, has expressed that she wants her work to make you think and perhaps affect change. It reminds that jewelry is powerful. All of this is to say that there are many ways to look at jewelry. I'll share with you a few here, illustrated through examples from the Museum of Fine Arts Boston's collection. Remember that all of these works of art tell many stories simultaneously and have many histories. I may have classified them one way here, but most exist in various categories and can be of understanding and function. Art, since antiquity, falls into one or more of these broad categories, which I'll get to in a minute. But before I do, I want to share here the way that I sometimes think about the multiple histories that jewelry can have, like the spokes of a bike, almost like a choose your own adventure story here, where you can choose to go in any direction here with your history and with the storytelling. You can tell the story of materials, You can tell the story of a maker. You can tell the story of its social history, and so on and so forth. And it can go in any of these ways. There are a few themes that resonate over time that are seen throughout jewelry history. Since antiquity, most jewelry falls into one or more of these very broad categories: magical jewels, emblems of wealth and power, tokens of affection and remembrance, dress and adornment, or jewels and the avant-garde. I'll begin here thinking for a moment about magical jewels. The wearing of these jewels is thought to give the wearer a supernatural power. It offers protection from threat or illness. These could be amulets or funerary ornaments. Examples include reliquaries, pilgrim badges, rosaries, birthstones, zodiac symbols, good luck symbols. And they communicate between the maker, wearer, and the viewer. Many of the pieces that I'm going to show you here were made and buried in ancient Egypt or in ancient Sudan by the Nubian culture. Here, you're looking at one of the most prized jewels from the MFA's collection. This is called the Head of Hathor pendant, and it combines this gold element on the top showing the goddess Hathor with this rock crystal bead on the bottom. And rock crystal and gold were all often found in the same veins of the earth, and so they were given similar protective properties to the wearer. It's interesting to note the MFA has many ancient jewels in the collection. Of the 22,000 objects that I mentioned, 18,000 are ancient excavated beads. And most of them are made of clay or made of gold or made of a hard stone material like this. Very few silver objects exist today because those really broke down in the environment of the pyramids, whereas gold and these other materials survived thousands of years. This Head of Hathor pendant has a core in the middle that you can just make out kind of in shadow here that has a rolled papyrus text that's believed to have magical writings that would have protected the wearer as this was worn. This jewel is probably no more than 1 inch tall, yet it has this incredible, powerful presence. And blown up here on your screen, it's hard to realize the size and recognize its importance. This next example is also a Nubian piece from the Meroitic period. This is probably the earliest example of enamel that's in the MFA's collection. Here you can see the colors have survived really beautifully. Of course, each of these colors is symbolic of life along the Nile with the blue, green, and reds. And here you can see again the image of Hathor seated in the middle, and these cartouche patterns, these diamond patterns that decorate the sides of the bracelet. Having the image of a god would have been protective alone, just having that as the, gives the attributes of that god to the wearer and would have been a way to protect. Fast forward a little bit to the classical world, and here you see another highlight from the MFA's collection. This is called the Nike earring. This is quite a large brooch that's made up of more than 90 soldered parts. And you can see just how complicated this jewel is. You can see it here next to a sculpture. It's interesting to compare works of jewelry alongside images of it being worn. So sculptures, paintings, photographs, to give some kind of comparison. This is a Navaratna armlet. It would have been worn on the upper arm as an armband tied around the arm with these silk cords. And this comes from India. And it has the 9 stones here that connect to the zodiac and that connect to the different birthstones, the different zodiac stones that you'd be born under. And so each of these is symbolic and has a different meaning that's given to it. It's not uncommon in this category, kind of going between magical jewels and jewels of art, emblems of wealth and power, which I'll get to in a moment, to see jewelry that brings some kind of animal qualities to it. So the fierceness of a tiger, for example, here worn in this tiger claw necklace from the 19th century, where actual tiger claws are put onto the necklace And wearing that is thought to give some kind of protective quality and to bring on some of those qualities of the animal that the elements came from. On the left, a gold version dating to the 12th century from Indonesia, from the island of Java, that shares a similar shape, although, not necessarily the same meaning behind it. Emblems of wealth and power, perhaps the symbol that's most associated with jewelry history. This features expensive or rare materials. It displays artistry and demonstrates access to trade or travel, especially for much of history where sumptuary laws really put limits on ownership and the use of luxury goods. The tiger claw necklace is also an example of this. Here on the left, you see this coin necklace in gold, where actual money is being worn in this gold precious material on the body, a clear indicator of wealth and status. In the 19th century and the 20th century, and even into today, the 21st century, diamonds often convey this. And this necklace by Tiffany & Company on the right has many large diamonds in it. It also features a matching pair of earrings in the collection. And this was worn as a wedding jewel. It was given to a bride on her wedding day. And it has this blue enamel in the background and these 5 diamonds coming together to make this, or 6 diamonds to make this star pattern with a large central diamond and then 5 diamonds of the point to make the points of the star. Tokens of remembrance or affection is the third category. These are symbols of friendship, love, or loss. Memory can take many forms. It can be personal, it can be collective. There are jewelries that are sentimental, where the first letter of each gemstone spells out something like dearest or regard, to give this, it's like this language of jewelry where these messages are conveyed in the piece. More well-known in this category of jewelry, I think, is probably something like the memento mori, something that's left behind. Like hair jewelry is often thought of this as a form of mourning jewelry. And these 2 brooches on the right have a woman's hair that's been plaited into a brooch on the top and a ring on the bottom with a pearl surround. These were made to remember the life of a woman named Hannah Willard, who died about 1807. And the back of both of these jewels is inscribed similarly. These might have been handed out and given to her friends at a funeral or after her death as a way of remembering her. On the left of the screen here, you see what's known as a lover's eye brooch. And these brooches are sometimes thought of as being about memory or about memento mori, but more often they're about love and friendship. And you see the kind of anonymity that exists in them by just having the eye pulled out. This is the same period where people might have worn miniature brooches, where you would have had a whole portrait of a person on a larger brooch. These eye miniatures tend to be smaller and pass between lovers as kind of a secret token. Sometimes they have a diamond tear, or the head is in the clouds, and there's certain indicators there that might be referring to the fact that the person who's shown there is dead, but more likely they're just meant to be these anonymous jewels that somebody could wear, and it wouldn't be obvious whose image this was. Here's a brooch, one of the favorite necklace, one of the favorite pieces from the MFA's collection. Students are often asking to see this necklace, The Tragedy of Great Love by Lisa Gralnick, that dates to 1994. And inside it opens up, it's kind of this just silver box on the outside. It's closed with the closure that you see on the left here. And when you open it up, this is what you see on the inside. On the left, The Tragedy of Great Love. On the right, a gold, presumably a wedding band with sugar and salt, talking about both the sweetness and the saltiness of a relationship. Jewelry in the category of tokens of remembrance or affection could also remember things like an event or an anniversary. This is the charmed bracelet that was created just a few years ago in 2019, when Sienna Patty was celebrating her 20th anniversary, the 20th anniversary of her gallery. And she asked many of the artists that she'd worked with over those 20 years to create 2 1-by-1 charms, 1 inch by 1 inch. One of the charms was sold in her shop in an exhibition, and the other was placed on this bracelet and donated to the MFA. These are all, and charm bracelets are wonderful in the way that they function both as autobiographical jewels, where they often tell the story of somebody's life with charms that are picked up over the course of vacations and celebratory moments or given for anniversaries, and the way that those function as a communication device. Imagine yourself sitting across from somebody at a table wearing a bracelet like this. It immediately invites conversation and reflects on memory and storytelling. Now, jewelry, not surprisingly, also has a long connectedness to dress and to fashion. And here are just 2 examples of jewelry that is both functional and ornamental. This jewelry is really about display, and examples in this category are more closely aligned than some of the others with worn objects. So combs, for example, on the left is an early example of a comb dating to about 3850 BC. And on the right, this bead net dress. I mentioned to you before that about 18,000 of the MFA's objects are beads. And this is an example of that. When the team from the MFA and Harvard excavated these pyramids and these tombs in ancient Egypt and Nubia, they also utilized cutting-edge photography. And in doing that, the man who ran the digs, his name was George Reisner, he wanted to excavate things out of the tomb so that, 100, 200, 1,000 years later, if people went back, they would be able to put things back as they were. And what that meant for jewelry historians and for curators of the future is that they had that photo documentation to show how the beads were meant to be laid out. And so when these objects of jewelry were found in the tombs, the stringing material would have decomposed, it would have been gone, but the beads remained. So the fact that they were photographed in situ meant that later, conservators and curators were able to put the beads back together, which was the case of this dress, using that photography and recognizing the patterns that were supposed to be made here. This would have laid over the top of the mummy as a dress, here paired with a bead net collar. There's many other examples of the way that jewelry functions as an element of fashion or dress. For example, on the left, this netsuke and iro. Netsuke is like a button almost, like a toggle you'd put through a buttonhole. And that's the element that you see here at the top, this mask, and it's attached to an iro, which is almost like a small handbag, very small, that would have been suspended from the waist and where you could have put some of your essentials. In Western culture, similarly, the chatelaine functioned in almost the same way. It had a clip on the top that's shaped almost like a hook that would have hooked over the waistband. And here in these 3 compartments are different tools that you might have needed in your everyday life. Sometimes things like keys are also suspended from an element like this. More directly related to fashion, in the 20th century, jewelry and haute couture in Paris become really intertwined. Here on the left is a photograph of Gabrielle Chanel, better known as Coco Chanel, with the jeweler Fulco de Vidora, as they're creating a deeply personal jewel to her, a pair of ivory and gemstone bracelets with a Maltese cross set in semi-precious gemstones. These bracelets, she wore one on each wrist, are said to have originated or been inspired by her travels in Ravenna, Italy, where she saw these mosaics that she then translated into these bracelets and then later brought into some of the fashion jewelry that she produced for her house. So for example, on the right, fast forward from the 1930s to the 1970s, and she's taken this iconography from her bracelets that come originally from a trip, and she's created it here in this brooch that she's still showing with her jewelry from this period, with her fashions from this period. Here, the glass ornaments, glass gemstones and beads are meant to look like these semi-precious stones that exist in her bracelet. The avant-garde, jewelry's connectedness to different art movements throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. These are really forward-looking jewels created by artists starting in the late 19th century. And there's a connectedness to art movements where the artist was involved not only in the design, but also in the fabrication. So often in these cases, as you know, the artist is overseeing the entire process, and it's not fractured and segmented in the way that we see jewelry sometimes being created in the fine jewelry world, where one person designs it and another person makes it. Here it's the same person. These materials tend to be inexpensive. Here you're looking at the Marsh Bird brooch by Charles Robert Ashby, who was a pioneer of the arts and crafts movement. And this is silver, seed pearls, and plique azure enamel creating this bird. And it's set in a brooch today as it exists in the MFA's collection. But at the time it was made, it was actually a hair ornament. And as hair combs and hair ornaments went out of fashion, as women began to cut their hair in the 1920s, suddenly there was no need for a hair comb like this, and it evolved into a brooch. And so today on the back is a pin stem, and the element that would have made it here a comb is long gone. But luckily we have this image that shows the way that it was originally created and the way it was originally meant to be seen when Ashby made it in the early 20th century. This is an example by Jörg Vekstrom. It's called the Janus necklace. And in Europe, you tend to see these contemporary jewelry being made of more precious materials. So whereas a lot of American makers in the 60s and 70s were using found materials or embracing things like silver and copper, in Europe, you see that there's still a strong goldsmithing tradition, and that the style is becoming more avant-garde, more associated with art movements, like you see here. Vekstrom's designs from the 1960s are very much related to sculpture from this period, for example. Here are some American examples: of brooch on the left by Henry Bertoia from 1941, and the lover's brooch that was made by both Sam and Carol Kramer in 1949, and that actually moves to create this lover's scene. The Kramers were part of a Greenwich Village movement that popped up in the 1940s and 50s that very much comes out of World War II, and that's challenging people to think about what jewelry is and how to wear it. Jewelry like this is starting to be shown in exhibitions at MoMA and elsewhere at this period. And so this style of jewelry, this avant-garde style, is really blossoming during this period, not only in the United States, but elsewhere. And at the MFA, we have a very strong connection of contemporary jewelry that goes back to this mid-20th century period where the genre was really kind of reaching its height. Another pioneer of this movement is Art Smith, and here you see his modern cuff on the right dates to 1948, so the same period as the other jewels I've been showing to you, and on the left a model wearing it. And one of the things that Art Smith was always thinking about is he was always thinking about the way the body would become part of his design. So not only the way that people would see it and think about it, but literally how the skin would come through the design. And so you often see in his work these negative spaces where the skin, the wrist, the chest, for example, would shine through and become part of the design as it was being worn. Finally, I ask you to please, for the sake of future curators, historians, collectors, please sign your work. Perhaps 100 or 1,000 years from now, jewelry will be thought of differently or studied differently, but this is your legacy. Leave your mark. Without a signature, it's challenging and sometimes impossible to tell who made something. You put a lot of time and energy, a lot of yourself into your practice. So don't let it leave the studio without a clear indicator of who made it. Historically, It was the law to mark your jewelry. Maker's marks were registered with the city, assay marks assured the quality of materials, and import and export marks left a trail of how things moved around the world. Times have changed, materials have changed, and in some cases the rules have changed. But as you think about the life of your work, know that years from now, when you're long gone, people should know your legacy. If possible, also document your process. As a curator there's nothing better than photographs, drawings, or illustrations and other materials that enhance understanding. This carved bulldog was modeled on a real-life Parisian pup named Cody, and his address is on his collar. In our files, we have a photo of the dog seen here on the left. You can see him posing on the far left here. I know there's two dogs in that picture. And so it's exciting to be able to have something like this. If you make a drawing, keep that drawing and keep a record of these materials. So, in the future, you can say something about the process or what inspired you, years down the road. This brooch formerly belonged to Queen Mary and came to the MFA with this card on the right that says, "For Angela," from Queen Mary, demonstrating that the gift that this was gifted in 1952. You can see the date there in the lower left corner, about 25 years after it was made, to a cousin. Finally, this jeweled compact by Jean Schlumberger for Cartier resides next to the die press from which it was shaped. Looking at it alongside the compact, it reveals the incredible chasing work of the fabricator, the hand skills. This was designed by Jean Schlumberger and it was retailed by Tiffany and Company, but it was made by a man named Louis Ferron, who had trained in Paris and come to the United States in the years after World War II, and he was not allowed to sign his work. The American stamping system was such that the designer and the retailer stamped the work, and the fabricator is anonymous. And that was true when this was made in 1951, and that's true today. It's unusual to see a fabricator's mark on an American piece of jewelry. And I've spent years learning about the life and legacy of Ferron, who was very frustrated by the fact that he couldn't mark his work, so that as Schlumberger became more famous and Tiffany became more well-known, he was, unknown in his field. And yet he was within the industry largely considered one of the best goldsmiths working in New York. So no one is telling you that you can't sign your work. So mark it proudly so that you'll be remembered for perpetuity. Today, whenever possible, when we acquire work by contemporary artists, we always try and get the drawings and the related materials to deepen the story of the work and the artistic process. And as I host classes at the museum and share the collection, they always enjoy seeing these objects, and they really add depth. Unfortunately, in this recorded format, there's no opportunity to ask questions or for me to engage in the robust conversations that I hope this lecture highlights and brings to your class. But you can always reach out to me on Instagram at Jewel Curator. And I hope that this kind of excites you and ignites some ideas as you begin to think about your submission to So Fresh, So Clean. What is the future history of your work? Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing how this information informs the work that you submit to the Design Challenge. Thank you.